Welcome to the Oracle Fusion Middleware Virtual Developer Day. This is exploring ADF 12c and Java EE development in Eclipse. My name is Greg Stachnick and I'm a product manager in the Development Tools group, focusing on Eclipse development tools as well as the Oracle Cloud. In this session we'll look at an introduction to Oracle Enterprise Pack for Eclipse, we'll provide an overview of the Oracle ADF framework, and then we'll look at a demonstration of how we can build ADF applications with WebLogic Server 12c. Enterprise Pack for Eclipse is Oracle's strategic Eclipse-based IDE for the Java EE developer who's building Java SE, Java EE, or Java web applications for strategic Oracle runtimes, such as the Oracle Database, WebLogic Server, Glassfish, and Oracle Coherence. At a high level, Enterprise Pack for Eclipse 12.1.2 provides plugins layered on top of the Eclipse platform and Eclipse Web Tools platform, and gives additional design time tools for Java EE, for Oracle ADF. It gives a suite of tools for Oracle Database, as well as a series of features for WebLogic Server deployment, Glassfish development, as well as Oracle Coherence. Lastly, it provides tools for web service developers who are building both SOAP and REST-based web services. A key differentiator for Oracle Enterprise Pack for Eclipse is AppXray. AppXray is a dependency analyzer, and it works by analyzing your projects within your Eclipse workspace, looking at all of the files, all of the objects, all of the XML configuration files, and with this information it tries to understand what are the different dependency relationships within this application and within all these artifacts. And with that information it allows us at design time to provide validation between dependencies, content assist, hyperlink navigation, as well as refactoring. In this diagram we're showing kind of the typical way AppXray would approach your project. It'll look at your application, tries to understand the different layers of the application, such as maybe your web pages, your Java objects, your XML configuration files, your web services, your database connections, and then it tries to understand what are these relationships and how can we validate those dependencies and give you more information about your application, as well as help you find potential broken dependencies at design time. In Enterprise Pack for Eclipse 12.1.2 we introduced support for WebLogic Server 12c. Now historically Enterprise Pack for Eclipse has provided support for every currently supported version of WebLogic Server, and that includes WebLogic Server 9.x all the way up and through 12.1.2. Enterprise Pack for Eclipse WebLogic Server Tools gives you the ability to run, deploy, and debug your applications locally as well as remotely to both single servers as well as to clusters. Enterprise Pack for Eclipse provides support for WebLogic shared libraries, both being able to use WebLogic shared libraries in your applications as well as author shared libraries. We provide tools for fast swap, which is WebLogic's implementation of Java's class redefinition feature, giving you some performance benefits when you're doing iterative development with Java classes. And then Enterprise Pack for Eclipse also provides some tools for WebLogic Server customers who fit more of an administrative role, giving you tools for the WebLogic scripting tool, some rich browsers for the WebLogic Server domain mbeans, as well as some tools to help migrate applications between different WebLogic Server runtime versions. In the demonstration we're about to get into, we're going to be building applications using Oracle ADF and deploying to WebLogic Server. Oracle ADF is our strategic standards-based application framework which enables you to build both rich web and mobile applications that follows the standard model view controller patterns and is based on Java EE technologies. Before we get into the demonstration, we'll just provide an overview of the different layers of the ADF framework. At the view layer, ADF uses the ADF Faces rich client components. This is 150 rich HTML5 and AJAX enabled components, which range from standard buttons, sliders, and layout components, all the way to very rich and complex data visualization components. The ADF Controller is an extension to the Java Server Faces page flow controller, and it enhances the JSF page flow engine by allowing you to define reusable process flows, which you can use within multiple applications, package up into jars, and pass along as ADF libraries. The ADF Controller with the design time tools allows you to diagram your process flow, as we can see in this diagram. The ADF model data bindings provides a unified binding solution, making it easy to bind UI components to backend services. This works in conjunction with the ADF data controls. ADF data controls provide an abstraction of a business services data model, and they give a consistent mechanisms for clients and web applications to access data and actions defined by diverse data providers. In this sample application that we're going to build, we're going to use data controls to bind to EJBs and JPA entities. The ADF developer has a choice between two IDEs to build their ADF applications: Oracle JDeveloper and Enterprise Pack for Eclipse. In Enterprise Pack for Eclipse 12.1.2, we include new support for Oracle ADF 12.1.2 as well as ADF Essentials. As you'll see in the demonstration, we'll look at how Eclipse allows us to create our projects very quickly, use ADF Faces components based on new standards of Java Server Faces and Facelets. We will show how we can drag and drop to build up our rich web UIs, as well as we'll look at how we can use the ADF bindings layer and data controls to bind our ADF Faces components to our backend services. And all of this will be built with WebLogic Server, and we'll look at ways we can do iterative development. So let's get into a demo. So here I'm in Enterprise Pack for Eclipse, and this is based on Eclipse Kepler or Eclipse 4.3. Just to give a quick tour of the UI, I'm in the Java EE perspective. All my projects will be in my Project Explorer. As I'm doing drag and drop of my ADF Faces components or my data controls, it will be based on the palette. Here I'll have an outline of where all of my code outline will exist. We'll do all of our main work here in the middle. And here in the bottom we have already configured a connection to an Oracle database. And let's set up our connection to WebLogic Server. So we'll go and create a new server. And notice when we look at the support for WebLogic, we have support for all of the currently supported versions. So you can use a single IDE to build applications against WebLogic Server 9.2 and all the way through 12.1.2. In this case, we're going to use the latest. So we'll build a connection to a WebLogic Server 12.1.2 domain. So I'll provide my domain location, next, finish. So let's start the server and take a look quickly at some of the features that Enterprise Pack for Eclipse provides for the WebLogic Server developer. So my server is started, and so if I expand the branch next to the server, what I can see is I've got a list of my domain extensions. So these are all of the technologies that have been installed into this WebLogic domain. I can see a list of all of my modules. Now I'm just working against the admin server, but if I'm working against a cluster, I could also see what's deployed there. And these are some applications that are currently deployed. I can choose to drill down into any of those deployments. I can undeploy from within the IDE, and I can also get a listing of all the web services that may be deployed as well as part of this application. Also, what's been a very interesting feature is the ability to browse the MBean tree from within the context of the IDE. So here I can get into the MBean hierarchy and start to look at some of the values of this domain, MBeans. So here I can see specific MBeans within my domain, and these MBeans are I can see the MBean keys as well as the values if I use the property sheet. So then here I can browse my MBean tree and then get into the specific details of the properties of those MBeans. This is useful if I'm just need to get an idea of what the current state is of the domain, as well as if I'm working with the WebLogic scripting tool and need to see what specific MBean values are as I'm building up a WLST script. So we have a WebLogic server connection set up. It's running. We're running against a local domain, just developing against the admin server. So let's set up a project so we can start to build an Oracle ADF application with WebLogic Server. So I'm going to create a new ADF application. And the Oracle ADF application wizard is really just a template of a project, which will create three different types of projects. It'll create an EAR project, it'll create a EJB project, as well as a dynamic web project. So let's call this HR demo. We'll target this application against WebLogic Server 12c, and we are going to build a model, and we're going to use JPA and EJBs for that model. So I'll use one of my presets to configure my facets to support JPA and EJBs. And so as part of my JPA configuration, I'm going to use Eclipse link. I'm going to use the Eclipse link shared library that is installed in WebLogic Server, and we're going to target those entities and pre-populate my persistence.xml file with my HR schema. And so then we'll just continue setting up this project. For the ADF libraries, we will also use a shared library. And then lastly, in this case, let's use Maven to manage our dependencies as well as help us control our builds. One of the key features of WebLogic Server 12c as well as Enterprise Pack for Eclipse 12c is better support for Maven. So you can now populate Fusion Middleware repository with Maven-based libraries. The IDE can also invoke WebLogic Server Maven goals while you're doing your development. And we also, as you can see, have some Maven archetypes configured for Oracle ADF. So I'm going to let this project get configured, and then we'll start to build up the application content. So our project is created. Let's review some of the created artifacts that are included in this project template. So this is my EJB project, And so I can see that I have some ear content, and in this ear content I have some of the common and required configuration files. For example, WebLogic application.xml. WebLogic application.xml is one of the common WebLogic server deployment descriptors, and as you can see, in Enterprise Pack for Eclipse we provide rich editors for the WebLogic deployment descriptors. These give you kind of a master detail view of the WebLogic of this specific configuration file, allowing us to do things. In the case of an ADF application, it's pre-populated with some of the common shared libraries. When working with these deployment descriptors, we provide wizards to help you configure your content properly. We give you an indication of the suggested defaults, as you can see here with the light bulb. And we also link into context-sensitive help. So by hitting F1 on any of the fields in a WebLogic server deployment descriptor, I can pull up the relevant WebLogic server documentation for that field. These editors are also aware of the WebLogic server version you're targeting and will validate the properties based on that targeted WebLogic server. In the model project, we have our persistence.xml file configured. And this is pre-populated with some connection information to the database that we're going to be developing against. Because we're using Maven, we've also generated POM files based on an ADF project archetype. And by opening it up, it gets loaded into the POM editor, where we can see the artifact details as well as some of the dependencies. In this case, dependencies against some of the ADF runtime libraries. And lastly, the web project is pre-populated with the common configurations required to build an ADF application, including WebXML, your WebLogic.xml, faces configuration, as well as your ADF controller files. Now this application we will build against one of the sample Oracle database schemas, the HR schema. And so I've already created a connection to Oracle database. And here I can view the details of the schema from within Eclipse. So here I'm going to select my table, and I'm going to say let's take a look at this in our schema viewer. So the schema viewer will give us kind of an ER diagram view of this database schema, giving us a sense of what the relationships are and what the foreign key relationships are in the tables. Now we can also use Eclipse's Enterprise Pack for Eclipse's database tools to run SQL queries, as well as analyze the data and edit and load data. So for example, if I want to look at the details of the country table, I can load it, make modifications, generate a DDL from this database definition, and other things. Now to build an application around this schema, we're going to use Java Persistence, JPA. So I'm going to use my JPA tools and say create entities from tables. And so in this wizard we see the tables that are available in this schema. I'm going to select a subset of the tables to create entities from. So we'll pick maybe just a few tables, departments, employees, and locations. And we will list these classes explicitly in our persistence file. Here we can see a representation of the entity relationships as they exist in the database. AppXray analyzes your database schema and tries to show you the default relationships that we observe. Now you can always go in and modify the relationships, add your own relationships as needed. We'll put these generated classes in a package called model, and we'll keep the defaults for the key generator, the collection types, as well as fetch strategies. Lastly, I can customize the generated classes that will come out of these tables. So for example, if I wanted to change the class name of employee, maybe change the type that will map to the primary key, I have fine-grained control over all of the generation. In this case, once again, I'm just going to accept the defaults. So let's review the generated entities. So in my model package, I see I have 3 entity classes. Let's look at the employee entity. So as I open up the employee entity, I see standard JPA annotations. Annotations that are mapping each of my columns to the database, each of my variables to the database columns. I see the mapping using the @entity annotation, the @table annotation, mapping directly to the employees table, as well as a default named query to return all the rows in the employee table. Because I have an active database connection, I can get content assist in my annotations against the database. So for example, here for the table name, I can browse the list of available tables. As I am constructing my JPQL queries, I get content assist there as well. And I also get validation. Now, if I prefer to work in more of a design view when constructing queries and configuring my JPA entities, we can use that as well. Through the JPA details view. So the JPA details view is providing a graphical based property sheet to help with configuration of JPA entities. So here, instead of working with the annotations directly, I can interact with menus, drop downs to do my configuration, as well as I have a query editor here. So we have some entities. Now let's create some data access using an EJB. So I'm going to create an EJB session bean that will basically act as a facade. So let's call this HR facade. This will be a stateless session bean, and we'll include some basic CRUD methods for each of our entities in this session bean. And so let's look at this stateless session bean. So what we see is we get methods to add a new department, update a department, remove a department, and use the named queries that were in that department. In this case, the find all named query. And this is the same with the rest of the entities. So we have similar types of CRUD operations for employee as well as locations. So this will give us some basic data access to pull from and build our web application on top of. So the next step is I'm going to use the ADF data controls to create my common binding layer so that I can very easily bind my ADF Faces UI to my backend Java EE services. So here I'm going to create an ADF data control. And it's going to be an EJB data control for our HR session facade. And what we see then are the files that were generated, so that we get so if we want to go and drill down and look at the ADF data control files in more detail, we know where they are. And so here I can see in my data control manager the details of that data control that's mapping my EJB. So we have references to our find all methods. We have references to each of the operations that are in that EJB. And we can use this to get more details and configure our data control. So our model is basically done. And so let's go and start to build up our web UI. So in my dynamic web projects, let's create a new page. And in this case, we will actually use the ADF task flows. This will be a very simple task flow. It'll just have one view, but we can always extend that later and build a more complicated flow. And so this will be a bounded task flow, which will be self-contained, and we'll use page fragments for each of the view activities. And so when I say finish, it will load this task flow into our task flow editor. And so we see here in our task flow editor, we have our main work area, which gives us kind of a graphical grid that we can drag and drop task flow activities from our palette. We also have an overview if we prefer to work in more of a form-based master detail layout to do configuration. And then we can also just work against the source, where we provide contents assist and validation, all those kinds of things, against the schema. But we'll use the diagrammer in this case. So I'm just going to drag a single view activity into my workspace. We'll call it EMPS by departments. And so this will be a single page in this task flow. Now normally we would probably build a flow between multiple pages, but just to keep things simple, it'll be a single view. So we see that we have our default activity, obviously, is with this page, and also notice that we have a warning message here. So this is starting to expose some of that app X-ray validation. We've defined a task flow, we've added a view, but we know that this view activity needs to be backed by some sort of page. And so we give a warning saying that your task flow is incomplete. Specifically, a page is required for this view element. Now we can resolve that very easily just by double-clicking on the view. That'll bring us into our new ADF page wizard so that we can create this page. So in this case, I'm going to use a page fragment since this is a bounded task flow. And we have a couple of technologies that we can use when we're building these pages. In ADF 12C, we introduce support for facelets, which is the Java EE6 standard for Java Server Faces templating. And so I'll use facelets, and then as I'm building up this page, we have different layouts that we can choose from. So I'm going to select a 3-column layout, and I'll decide on how the stretching should work. I'm just going to have everything stretch. But we have other layouts as well, single column, 2-column with various headers and footers, but this is the one I'm going to use. I can also choose to apply color themes or skins. And so when I say finish, this will create and load my page into the web page editor. So this is the web page editor. Provides both a design and preview for our page. Notice the palette gets updated appropriately now that we're working on a web page. So from the context of a palette, we have all of our ADF faces tags as well as JSP and JSTL tags. We also provide the ADF data visualization components, which allow us to provide interesting data visualizations on collections of data. And then we also have a list of our variables that we can drag and drop and build basically ADF faces patterns from. So we've created a data control for our session bean, and we can use these to build up our page content. The outline view shows us a representation of the hierarchy of our page. And then another tool that we might find useful is the property sheet. So the property sheet will give us a design view, making it easy to do configuration of the ADF Faces components. So this is a 3-column layout. So the first facet will be the column on the left. So let's create that facet or finish that facet off. The second facet is going to be a splitter, and so we'll push some content into there as well. So maybe for the first column in this 3-column layout, let's maybe put a list of our departments. And so what we see here in our data controls is this find all method, which will return all of the departments in this HR schema. So we'll represent this list of departments here in this column, and then notice here we get a pop-up of different patterns that we can apply. So in this case we'll create a form. And this will be a read-only form. I think we're only going to use the department name and the department ID. And we'll add some navigation controls so we can go in next and previous. And let's see here. So the display names by default will just be the field name. Let's modify that a little bit. And then we can choose what kinds of components we want to use to represent this. In this case, we'll just use the default ADF output texts. And so this is the generated code. So we basically will have a series of 2 panels that will use the department name as well as the value of the department name, and then the department ID and the value of the department ID. And so some of the generated code is using EL, or expression language. It's referencing the bindings variable, and as we go into any of this EL, we can get content assist. This is starting to expose some more of this AppX-Ray technology. AppX-Ray understands that this page is backed by a page definition, which is giving us this bindings variable, and on that bindings variable we have various fields and various properties that we can get content assist on. It also gives us validation, so if we wanted to manually construct our expression language, it'll let us know if we have made a mistake or are working against a broken dependency. It also makes it very easy for us to navigate to any of those definitions. In this case, I selected my binding, and then it brings me into the bindings definition. So here I can see all the bindings available. I can see where they're being used, in which page and at which lines, and then I can also modify my bindings, add additional bindings, update the iterators, things like that. Now I just want to get back to my page, so I'm going to use this hyperlink in my usage and get right back to where I was coding. Another way we can use AppX-Ray to understand the dependency relationships in our application is using the dependency viewer. Now we've already started to build up a little bit of content here, so let's see what the dependencies are. So here I'm going to select my page and I'm going to say show me the AppX-Ray dependencies related to this emps by dept page fragment. And so the app examiner will show that using this page as the origin, I have upstream dependencies, which is my, for example, a view activity in my task flow. I see I'm also using the model components, which is the data control, and then I have my series of bindings. And so, for example, I have a binding that is specific to my department ID. It's using an iterator, which is pulling a data control from my facet, And I can use this view to walk the dependency tree, understand what the relationships are between my application, which objects are inheriting from which objects, and which configuration files may be involved. So for example here, I see that this adapter is an adapter for my EJB. And anywhere I see a number, I can get, that's giving me an indication of the number of dependencies that I have between those resources. And then I can right click and very quickly jump to that specific configuration or definition. Now if I wanted to retarget my application, or retarget this AppXray dependency view on a different resource, maybe I want to look at all of the dependencies related to department, which is my entity, I can do that as well. So I'm going to retarget on department, and then I can see that it has these additional dependencies built around it. And I can, from the context of my entity, then show all the dependencies there. So it's a useful tool to get a sense of how the different pieces of our applications are interconnected, and it also helps us find graphically where we might have broken dependency relationships. But going back to our page, we've got a basic form that's supposed to list our departments and the department names. Let's run it just to see how it works. So I'm using, as you saw before, we're using an ADF task flow, and that's using page fragments. So these page fragments will not run on their own. We're going to need to use them within the context of a main page. So I'm going to create another page and then insert that task flow as a region. So we'll create a page. Let's just call it main. And this will just be a single column. Okay, so we'll just put a reference to our task flow in this main grid cell. I'm just going to drag and drop this task flow here and use it as a region. And then we'll just run this page. And so when I say run on server, I can select which WebLogic server I want to run against. And so I could have multiple WebLogic server domains configured in my workspace. Could be different versions of WebLogic, and then we can select which of these applications we want to run on which server. Now the applications are configured for WebLogic server 12.1.2, and we can allow our project facets to enforce some restrictions so that we don't try and run applications on unsupported versions of WebLogic. For example, this application is using Java EE6, so we wouldn't be able to necessarily run it against, say, an older version of WebLogic that doesn't support Java EE6, say WebLogic 9.2. So we'll run this project here and then load the page. And so here we see our page. So in this left-hand column of the three-column layout, we list our department ID and our department name, and it's using the customizations that we had for those labels. And I can say next, and we can go through and look at the different department names and department IDs. So that's a good start. So let's build up this content some more. So we've got a list of departments. Maybe let's create a master detail kind of relationship between this list of departments and the employees in a specific department. So in this case, we'll go back to this main page, and in our center column, so this facet here, let's represent our list of employees. And so we'll represent this list of employees in a table. Now, employee has a lot of fields, so let's reduce that down so that our table doesn't get too huge. So we'll make it a read-only table with some single row selection. Maybe we'll enable some sorting, and then we'll remove some of these fields here. Maybe we'll just do employee ID, email, first name, last name, and salary. And so now what do we see? We have a new table component. This table is 5 columns. And I can use the outline view to navigate to each of the details of the columns. So for example, this first column, we see we're going to have the employee ID. And we can get some content assist, just like we saw before with our departments, based on the expressions that we're pulling from the bindings. If I prefer to use more of a graphical representation of configuring my expressions, my bindings, and my ADF components, I can use the property sheet to do that very easily as well. So here I can, for my header text, for example, I can browse all of the bindings that are available in my page definition file and select which bindings I would want to use. But let's just run this again and see how this looks in our page. So we'll say run as run on server. In this case, we know we're always going to want to run this one against my local WebLogic server 12.1.2. So I won't need to see that dialog again. And so now when I see the page, I have 2 of the columns populated. So I can browse my departments, and I see this master detail relationship between the specific department and the department's employees. So what do we want to do with this last column in this 3-column layout? Let's try representing this list of employees again, but using a different pattern. Not a table this time, but let's represent this list of employees as one of the data visualization components. In this case, we'll select one of these graphs. So we have a gallery of various graph types and various graph orientations. So I'm going to have a bar graph using this quick layout. I'll select, let's say, the first name and then the salary. So let's hold on, I think I need to swap those. Alright, well maybe we'll just do it by employee ID. Okay, so we have a basic DVT graph with some DVT components, and so let's save, this and run it. So once again, we'll run this page against our local WebLogic server and see how this looks and see if we're happy with the results. Okay, so now when we're in the page, maybe we'll expand this view a little bit more. So then what we see is we have our list of departments, we have our list of employees, and then we have our graph. And so our graph is showing our salaries based on the employee ID. Oh, and it looks like I may have transposed the bars in the X and Y axis, so let's fix that. Also, maybe what we want to do is instead of having it 3 columns, we'll have 1 column and then stacked components here. So let's make a quick modification. So I'm going to go back into my HR page, or into my DVT graph, and we'll just go and use the property sheet this time instead of using drag and drop to reconfigure this graph. So we'll edit the component definition and we'll just swap the bars. And then while we're at it, let's change the orientation of this panel splitter. So here I'll select the panel splitter component. I see the orientation is currently horizontal, so maybe I want it to be vertical instead. And then I could also go and maybe add some different styles to my graph. Maybe I want to add some animations or things like that. Maybe add a 3D effect to those bars. So let's do that and make those modifications as well. So here I'll be in my bar graph. And in this case, maybe I want to use the property sheet to add some changes to the appearance. So maybe we'll add a 3D effect to the graphs. And maybe we'll try and add some animation as well. We'll add auto as well as some sort of animation when we paint. So let's save these changes and then just refresh the page. Okay, so let's refresh this page and see if, look at how my modifications have taken effect. So we'll maximize this screen to give us a little more real estate. And then what we see is now we have a department, and as we scroll through our departments, we have this master detail of our different components. So we've looked at how App X-Ray can give us assistance to understand dependency relationships, give us some content assist and validation when we're writing our pages, working with our expressions. We've looked at ways that App X-Ray can give us support for visually representing dependency relationships through the App X-Ray dependency viewer. App X-Ray also helps us with performing refactoring. So say for example I wanted to refactor this task flow for some reason. Maybe I wanted to modify the name or something like that. So say we start with this name HR flow. Maybe we want to see if we were to change the name to a different task flow, we'll hit the preview, and then what we will see is that AppX-Ray will go and look at the dependency relationships and show us what needs to be changed in order to perform that renaming operation, for example. So, for example, we see that by changing the task flow, we need to update our page definition. There may be some additional, there could be additional changes that we need to make to our pages, to some of our components, or to different objects. And this is taking the dependency information that we have about this project and feeding it into the native Eclipse refactoring features. Eclipse provides support for Java refactoring, but it doesn't do much for Java EE type artifacts, web pages, XML configuration files, descriptors, web services, or ADF, any of the ADF constructs. And so AppX-Ray is able to enhance Eclipse's refactoring by taking all that dependency information and feeding it into the Eclipse refactoring engine. So let's review what we did in this demonstration. We used Oracle Enterprise Pack for Eclipse 12.1.2, Oracle Strategic Eclipse IDE for Java EE development, configured it to work with WebLogic Server 12.1.2, 12c, and then we used the Oracle ADF 12c framework to build a master details type application, pulling data from Oracle database, and then looked at some of the design time features that the tooling gives us to help us be more productive. Things like AppX-Ray, allowing us to understand the dependency relationships of our application, visually represent dependencies, validate dependencies, as well as give us support for more complex refactoring scenarios. To get more information about our development tools or our frameworks, check out the Oracle OTN community. You can go to oracle.com/go-to-OPE for more information about our tools, or oracle.com/ADF for more information about the ADF framework.